Okay, cool. Yeah. So I'm Nick Cambler. I work with Tyler here at Calm. I'm a marketer. Um, and very specifically, what I've done in marketing post then is like written a lot about the actual like sort of nuts and bolts of marketing, how to break things down to like their lowest sort of level, the lowest arguments in like copywriting, and then build it back up. And so I think I was very kind of not confused, but highly intrigued by the tech, like the folks in tech breaking hard for Trump and MAGA in this
Yeah.
election cycle. And so I was just like super curious to understand what was going on, and did the same thing here. Um, so and then like I guess just politically, I'm kind of more to the left, maybe like alt left, more humanistic, egalitarian perspectives, like highly democratic, especially around like notions of freedom of speech. So there's potentially some bias here.
How
Um,
do you define alt left? I feel like that's people use that term differently. I think everyone kind of agrees what the alt right is, but how do you
yeah,
define alt left?
well, I think the left is interesting because you have like sort of classic democratic, like sort of like maybe like FDR politics or something, and
Right.
like over time that's sort of been like all that was like a very socially conservative uh, uh,
Mm.
version of the Democratic Party, and over time, like I think that's been chipped away at by like the corporate uh, the corporate establishment, and like the neocons, which we'll get around to, kind of like making their way into
Yeah.
the Democratic Party. But then it's also been like
Mm.
there's a lot of social justice stuff associated now, so it's like that party has
Mm.
shifted a lot, and the only like
Yeah.
political alternative that exists is like socialism or democratic socialism or something, which I'm also like
Right.
an entrepreneur. I have like more like libertarian market views. So like
Right.
figuring out, I'm still sort of in the throes of figuring out how to qualify and like communicate like a sort of a new politic. Um,
Mm. Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, that's really well said. I mean, I feel like the Democratic or the left in general, there's kind of like three wings. There's like the Hillary Clinton wing, which is like the neocon intervention, interventionist, globalist, corporatist, I would say. And then there's like the Bernie wing, which is honestly not very like woke. Like Bernie doesn't talk about like race and pronouns, and he doesn't care about that stuff. He's just like economic left. He wants like the people who made billions of dollars in the private markets to give back and use the power of the state to kind of redistribute that wealth back to the people. And then there's kind of like the AOC wing, and she, maybe she's not the perfect figurehead. Maybe it's more like the Ibram X Kendi wing, which is like anti-racism, and it's almost like a new religion in many ways. Like it's structured as a religion. Um, so that's kind of how I think about the current left. So like there could be a movement that just like combines maybe like two of those three and just like is able to build a coalition that's a majority. But I actually think that what's more likely to happen is that somebody new comes in and is able to just like have a totally new narrative. Because I think all three of those narratives are not going to get to 50%. Like Hillary Clinton does not have 50%. Bernie Sanders does
right.
not have 50%. AOC does not. Like they're all too unpopular. So I feel like it's either going to just be in the wilderness for a long time, or it's they're going to have to come up with something significantly different. That's like a new social contract that is not just either of those three. That's my view on the left right now.
Yeah, and I'm very nervous that it'll be more reactionary than like an actual movement or like
Mm,
philosophy, because you see it oftentimes in like South America or Latin American countries or wherever you have this sort of like you have this like populist like reactionary leader that rises up to the top, and it just fuels like an equal and opposite reaction.
mm,
And
yes.
so and then you have like a century of destabilization or something. So um I think as I'm thinking through like the new politic, it's like something that can take that's like more broad, like more values oriented, and like can take the conversation down a little bit.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's great. Okay, I interrupted you before you even got to your second slide, so keep going.
Yeah. So on that notion, this is a presentation really about neo-reactionary thought, and a lot of people don't know what that is, but and for that reason, like maybe it makes sense to go back a bit. Um, I grew up on the internet, uh, from going from like maybe not as much as the generation right above me that was on like Usenet and shit, but like I was stealing AOL discs from uh, from the big box retailers to like to get on there and do dial up for free and stuff, that sort of thing. So
You've been
uh,
very
I've
online
been
before very online was the thing.
I've always been chronically online, and that especially was true in early adulthood, like getting on 4chan and like trying to see like the back corners of the internet, all like the sort of like side forums um and like there's a lot of curiosity there, but also a lot of horror. And so I s-
Right.
I started to see a lot of like really aggressive sort of like uh sort of postings, and then just with regard to neo-reactionary thought, what happened is there was um, a lot of sort of anti-democratic uh, content coming up in like the platform era, and this can be like summed up by someone like Curtis Yarvin, who wrote kind of a critique on neoliberal values in modern democracy writ large. And he's basically saying that it's a facade, it's something that we've been brainwashed into believing, and it doesn't really work, and that like
Yeah.
we would function much better as a society if it was in the image of a corporation with like a strong sort of like monarch, like more of like a return to monarchy. Um,
Right.
uh, and then that kind of got mixed together with more like accelerationist, like tech beliefs, um, uh, into like a wing of this quote unquote accelerationism. But
So that was actually one of my key questions here was so we were talking about this as like in the DM about accelerationism. And I feel like at first I understood you to mean like EAC, like Jeff Bezos, the Jeff Bezos guy on Twitter, who's like the founder of EAC, which is like effective accelerationism. And they like I don't exactly know what their like ultimate dream is, other than just like more tech. It's not that well defined to me. It seems like they're obviously against like regulation in AI. That's like the most clear policy goal they have. um, and they are pro like an advanced future, meaning like they post memes all the time about like living among the stars, and it's sort of like AI pictures of like a post Jetsons world where we're like taking space elevators to like Alpha Centauri and stuff like that. Um, it's not exactly clear to me like what they see as like the 10-year vision. I think they're more against like the regulators and what they call the D cells. And then I think right under the surface of that, and they call it like the techno capital machine, which is like this, they almost conceptualize it as like an organism that is moving in a very particular direction and has like a goal, and that our
yeah,
job as humans is basically to let that machine like do its thing, which is kind of a crazy political worldview to have. Like we're no longer in control in some sense, we're just like trying to get out of the way of this machine that's like optimizing for like dominance over the galaxies or something like that. It's a very strange political view, but
so I'll start.
and we
I'll
can
start.
we can talk more about that. But my question was like, how does that relate to like the Nick Land accelerationism? Because that seems very different to me. And maybe I'm just naive and I don't understand the connection, and they're actually like very related. But it seems like a very different thing. Like Nick Land is much more like a literal racist who like believes like, whereas I don't really see that in like the EAC movement. So maybe I'm missing that. Or am I missing something there?
Yeah, so it's kind of just, and we can kind of get around to like the etymology of all this stuff, but like accelerationism believes essentially that the way to upend these like neoliberal philosophies is by accelerating technology so much that it dissolves our current social structures, um,
Mm,
and
mm,
um,
right.
and and he, he writes a paper about this called the Dark Enlightenment, and
Right.
I
Right.
don't have like the exact details offhand, but effective accelerationism, when we talk about reactionary stuff too, is actually more of a reaction to effective altruism. And if like effective
Right.
altruism
Right.
kind of saw
Yes.
like several steps ahead of what would happen in a singularity event, and in like a bad one, in a bad situation, and tried to make sure we avoided that. And effective accelerationism is essentially like, that's stupid. The most important thing is like technological advancement. That's like the highest good
Yes.
is
Right.
like pushing forward technology, GDP, etc. And so what you see out of that is people like Mark Andreessen then hitting the media tour talking about this stuff, and saying like, oh
Mark
well, if we just
Andreessen. Mark Andreessen's the most prominent EAC, I would say, in the world at this point, unless you count Elon. But and
yeah
there's a reason why Elon wears the black MAGA hat. Like that is not an accident. That is the Dark Enlightenment for sure. I definitely agree with
yeah
you on that, 100%.
when he goes, I am dark, I'm not just mega, I am dark mega. He's like talking about this, and we'll get around to that. But with
Yeah, yeah,
Andreessen,
definitely, definitely.
Andreessen too, they painted it in this picture of it being like a very altruistic philosophy. Like, and on the surface, I like of all the neo reaction, the like new right coalition, this is my favorite of all the philosophies by far. And it's because in the mind of the people who are pushing it, at least there's like a value system I can somewhat agree with, and I think there's like I can get on board. I think there's some criticisms from that group that make a whole lot of sense. The problem is that the philosophy, when you pull underneath the hood, it really is not that different than raw accelerationism, or at least like the tactics. And even even Andreessen himself, in his article about techno-optimism, not only quotes Nick Land, but he quotes Italian fascists. So it's like very
Right,
intriguing
right.
that they found a way to package these ideas that normally, like,
Mm,
when they're existing on 4chan, like, are quite scary, but like to a mass market, like, kind of seem altruistic. And that's actually one of the major things that triggered like my sort of fears of all this stuff, is because like I came up on this. I see where it's coming from.
yeah, I think I don't disagree with anything there. I guess I'm just like, so, okay, so I'm on the Wikipedia now for accelerationism, and it's describing it more like the way that I see like the EAC or like the Mark Andreessen version of it, which is like tech is our god and we follow the techno capital machine. That theory. And the goal is to basically reach a technological singularity, essentially. But then in the third paragraph of that article, it says the term has also, in a manner strongly distinguished from original accelerationist theorists, been used by right wing extremists such as neo fascists, neo Nazis, white nationalists, white supremacists to increasingly refer to a quote acceleration of racial conflict through assassinations, murders, and terrorist attacks as a means to violently achieve a white ethno state. Now, that is very different. Like, that is, like, I would put myself as maybe not like quite EAC, but I feel like I'm EAC adjacent. Like, I feel like I understand a lot of the benefits of that view. And I have some reservations about it. I think it's a little bit oversimplified, like any ideology. But like, I would generally align myself with that view of the world, which is like let's move the tech as fast as we can, responsibly, obviously, but as fast as we can within that. Now, this white national ethno state, like I can't imagine an idea that I hate more than that. Like that is like literally the worst idea I can possibly think of. So like for me personally, like I feel like if we're not going to split those two and we're going to pretend like they're the same thing, like that's problematic. So yeah, do you have any thoughts on that? Are
Yeah,
you splitting those two or are you lumping them?
um, I think you got to split everyone's ideas, like, generally, but when we're looking at movements here and we're looking at alliances, so I think it's also important to
Mm,
understand like how people do relate and why they relate, and
mm,
um, and like
right.
I think this is an incredibly deep topic overall, like that goes down to like core psychology of people. So
Mm,
I think to think about why accelerationism is troubling and what the slippery slope is there between like accelerationism and white nationalism is, accelerationism is basically stating that
mm,
economic benefit is the most important, uh, the most important, like, I don't know, is pejorative the word, the goal. And um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so if that's like the value system, the next thing that comes out of it oftentimes in these circles is that like there is not like that not all cultures are equal. That actually the Western cultures
Yes.
are are much better because uh they um they they push scientific reasoning further
Right.
along. So there's not really that like multicultural, like
Right.
cultural relevance. And I think
Right.
that's where stuff like Manifest Destiny comes out of. But there's also
I
very
see.
something intriguing between all of these groups who don't really believe in democratic values, like a lot of, and want like a stricter chain, like a more powerful executive, is a lot of times
Mm.
like the rationale for that falls out of stuff like Rene Girard, which is something that Peter Thiel talks a lot about as one of his favorite philosophers, and his perspectives on
Yeah.
like mimetic philosophy and people and that and like how desire sort of works in relation to that. And it's sort of a dark view, and within that view, the view is that the way out from that mimetic desire is the scapegoat. So you have to be able to have someone to blame. And then, you know, when you start thinking about how like that centralized belief about these beliefs uh, around desire and envy and like the need for a scapegoat, and then you also start thinking about things like Western civilization and cultural, how which cultures are most important, and you understand how genetic hierarchy plays out, how racial hierarchy then gets justified in
Yeah.
people's minds, and there
I
becomes
can
like
see that. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
no, but it just becomes like a sort of strict like moral belief around like who should be scapegoated in what order. For my, this is more
Yeah.
just like hypothesis,
Yeah.
but
No. I think that's really interesting. I mean, I see what you're saying. You're actually drawing like deeper connections. That's great. I do. I wonder though, like, and I think this is actually the crux of the issue here around like the neo-reactionary. Like, to what degree is it a singular movement as opposed to like actually a pretty like contingent coalition that sort of formed like 8 months ago, like when Trump got shot, as like kind of like a reaction to a lot of other things that were happening in like the Biden administration and like various coalitions that were feeling kind of like put out by that set of policies for different reasons. Like say like the crypto people would be one, or like the AI people would be another, with like the Biden executive orders. People who care about inflation most of all, and that's their biggest thing. Like those. So like, is it just sort of like an anti-Biden coalition that's formed, and or is there like actually some deep ideology? And I think it's probably a combination of both. But I guess my fear is that we take people who like we over moralize, in the sense that like we take people who say things like, I think Trump should have the authority to radically reduce the size of government. And we then assume that that person is racist because they support that
yeah,
particular policy agenda. Or we take someone who says, like, I think that economic growth is our only way out of this debt crisis, and also our only way out of like the climate crisis and other things that we're facing. And so we should move our policies towards increasing the rate of economic growth. And then you say, oh, you're just an accelerationist who thinks that we need to get to like a white ethno state. And I know that you're not doing that. I'm just like, that's my fear, is that the reaction to this becomes like what is actually just a loose coalition that kind of formed in 2024, like for a lot of contingent reasons, like as opposed to like everyone in this coalition is like secretly a racist who thinks that only white people deserve like God's, you know what I mean? Like it's not like, for me
yeah.
personally, I feel like I'm somewhat aligned with certain aspects of this new right coalition, but like I'm very hesitant about others, like and extremely opposed to others. So it's like it's very complicated for me, and I just don't want to like make it sound like this whole thing is just like this one, Curtis Yarvin is just like pulling the strings, or and Peter Thiel is like pulling all the strings. I feel like
Well,
it's much more complicated than that.
it's clearly much more complicated than that, but it is a little weird that like the vice president was placed by JD Vance, that like all the people in Doge are like Peter Thiel fellows, or like worked at
Yeah,
Palantir, or like,
true.
you know,
No,
or
there are connections for sure.
like, yeah. So that Curtis Yarvin and him literally watched the election together apparently, and like, you know,
Really. I
Curtis
mean, JD
Yarvin,
Vance just gave like a very EAC speech to the EU like AI people, so that was interesting.
yeah.
I
And I
don't know if
mean,
you saw
Curtis
that. Yeah, I
Yarvin
think
just
on
went on.
Monday.
Yarvin just went on New York Times and talked about how he was sending Andreessen articles and stuff, and like, so these
Mm.
like connections aren't just like made up. Like these are widely
Mm.
corroborated. But I agree
Yeah, no, fair
100%.
enough. Fair enough.
I agree with what you're saying just about like not lumping people together. I think one thing that's intriguing to me is a lot of this stuff is so new. A lot of these coalitions are so new, and a lot of these ideas are so new that like what I'm kind of on the flip side, what I'm scared of is like that nobody's critically questioning these things. Like, my cousin's
Mm.
a firefighter, one of the highest ranking firefighters in the entire country. He does he's an incident responder for the northern New Mexico firefighting. So he's like literally like one of the top brass, and he like can definitively say that the LA firefighters is not like there was no like malpractice there. Like it was most likely like the related to the electric company not burning the wires, or like not triggering the breakers, and then just like the conditions or whatever. But then you have the entire media narrative that's like going full scale onto E&I, and then they're applying it in every single like portion of anything that happens. Plane crash happens, it's DEI. And like
Yeah.
I think when you compare
Totally.
that,
That's gross. That's so gross. I think the worst version of that I've seen maybe ever, but certainly recently, which is kind of a new thing that anti-DEI people feeling empowered was like they took like Kendrick Lamar, some idiot on Twitter, and it went huge viral. Was like he said this is a DEI halftime show. It's like what the fuck are you talking about? Like this is literally like one of the greatest poets on the planet. Like performing his work for you. Like that's just ridiculous. Like what are you like that's just clearly you see black people and you think they're bad. Like fuck you, man. But like I feel like the left has and you said this in that in the original thing I saw you share was like the left has lost their moral authority. And I think that that's created a power vacuum that like these types of ideas have fallen into. I also feel like the nature of podcasts, and I think podcasts are like 80% of this story in terms of how Twitter plus podcasts is like 80% of how this stuff has spread. But the nature of podcasts is that like they're kind of hard to fact check. Like they don't have like an editorial process the way that like a newspaper would. And like I am very anti corporate media. Like I do not trust newspapers generally speaking, and I trust people on podcasts more. But I'm aware that like the format itself does not allow for like pushback. And
right.
it basically allows the person who sounds the most confident to win. And like
And
that's interesting, but it's also very dangerous. Like that's a dangerous thing. Like Mark Andreessen sounds fucking confident because he has been thinking about these things for 35 years. And he's talked to every smart founder in Silicon Valley that's done anything in the past 35 years. Like he has thought about these things and he has practiced how to talk about them. And so he goes on podcasts now and he sounds very confident. And there's no way to fact check him. And like most of the people who are in podcasting who get big because they don't fact check or like push back against their guests. Like Joe Rogan does not push back. Lex Friedman does not push back. Like that's why they get the guests that they get because those guests like not getting pushback. So there
and
is this interesting dynamic with podcasts that I feel allows these types of ideas that have like a large kernel of truth in many cases, like in some cases, a very large kernel of truth, but then they're able to slip in these other things that don't and that are just like easily debunked, but it all just comes together in this like very charismatic package, you know?
yeah, and that's I think uh, how I've seen it as well. Like there are the criticisms that are incredibly valid, and so people feel very validated by the experience of of hearing things, and like oftentimes put down their guard to like think about it critically. But also like I think
Totally. And you're listening
um,
on double speed. You're just like raw dogging it. Like,
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know. There's like I'm a marketer, so there's a lot of studies about how like what people perceive as true is just related very strongly to the number of impressions that they receive, and there was
Mm,
just and
right.
there, maybe
Hmm.
the audience here is machine learning folks, but they just recent I forget who, but there was like a study done that showed that people basically don't have any reasoning ability for the most part. It's just people applying the heuristics that they've heard before, and then like drawing the connections. So so
Yeah, they
it's
say
like
the same thing about LLMs, right? They don't have reasoning. They just next token prediction. I think we're actually more similar to LLMs than we think.
yeah, and that's the research they were doing, or machine learning researchers were like, are humans like this? And it's like, well, actually, yeah, it looks like probably.
Right. Oh, I see what
So
you mean. Yeah. Right. 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 Right.
um
That's funny. That's funny.
yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I think there's like sort of a moral, like when you think about moral philosophy and truth telling, like truth telling is super important as well. Uh, so that's like kind of an interesting thing. But to go back to your deal just about like validating the concerns too and like understanding this coalition, can I hop through this a little bit?
Yeah. 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 Go for it. I interrupted you
Oh no, no,
specifically.
no. So yeah, the neo-reactionary thing, they all that stuff that was happening on the internet then got packaged up by Steve Bannon. This was all happening in like 2012 to 2000, or really 2009 to 2016, and it got packaged up in
Hmm.
Steve Bannon through like his Breitbart platform. And then
Yeah.
he stormed the castle with Trump, and they just totally took over the party. Um, and I think one thing that's very interesting there is the Republican Party actually has the ability for grassroots movements, which like that's something that doesn't really exist in the left wing politics. Like Trump did it because like
Yeah.
they allow like that exists, which I think is really healthy actually in a democracy. Um,
I agree.
um,
Yeah, I think the left, there's a lot of things, that's a separate topic, but there's a lot of things that have kind of switched. Like it used to be the left was the party of the working class. That's switched. Used to be the left was more grassroots oriented. That's switched. Used to be the left was the party of free speech. That's switched. Used to be that the left was more the party of, anti-war, and that's switched. So like those are major things, that have switched in the past 10 years. Really in the last 5.
yeah, yeah, and I mean let's look through how that happened. So the neo this the deal with uh, they basically forced the neocons out of the party completely, not completely, but like for the most part. It's like Liz
Basically.
Cheney is a
Yeah.
Democrat now, or whatever, basically.
Totally, totally, totally.
And
And yeah, Kamala was proud of and literally giving ads about how she was proud of Dick Cheney's endorsement. Like, what the fuck? Like,
and like
yeah,
Project Link, and I think it's so funny that people like don't admit when they switch parties on both sides. Like the Project Lincoln folks like won't admit that they're like in the Democratic Party right now. They're like never
it's
Trumpers, but like never Trumper is over. You lost. Like you're never going
yeah,
back to being Republican. So um, anyways, these coalitions were like forming and around that time, and we had these sort of changes that we're talking about now. Um, with like, I started hearing rumblings about effective altruism and OpenAI, knowing people who worked there. Like the social justice stuff was sort of, I think, starting to be more and more of a reaction to what was happening here as well, and vice versa. And um, that all kind of culminated in like the George Floyd stuff. And I took a side there myself. Kind of hard to see here, but I worked on a campaign to Feed by Treat. Um, it's a super PAC. Um, but like the culture and tech war just started to get more and more serious. And then, so you were saying like, how did these guys get aligned on philosophy, which is sort of like what this is, like the like anti-democratic, like more government in the image of a corporation, um, like anti-establishment views, and accelerationist views, against like the social justice, um, like platform control, uh,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
AI safety stuff started to get really tight. And Balaji, who is more like center right crypto
Yeah.
guy, talks about this a lot in his book, The Network State, which is about like a post state future. And he thinks in his book, he talks about how he thinks there's going to be a civil war in the US and um, that it's not going to be a battle like a physical battle. It's going to be a war of the minds. So it's going to be fought on platforms for like to win more of like cognitive hegemony and create transformation. So
Yeah.
um,
Ray Dalio already called it a civil war just like 2 weeks ago. He called
Naval
it a
called it
civil.
a civil war, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I think it's fair to say that in some ways, I mean, when you see what's happening, like one side is saying, hey, we're just implementing our mandate here. That's all we're doing is implementing the mandate that we were given by the voters. And the other side is saying this is literally a coup and a constitutional crisis. Like, that's pretty extreme. Like, that's an extreme level of rhetoric that's happening right now. That, like, one side is like, hey, we're just doing what we were told by the voters. And the other side is like, you're literally burning the country down. Like
well,
that
and I
is, I agree with. It's not a. It's almost like a cold civil war, if that makes sense. Like in the same way we had the Cold War versus World War II, but like the Cold War had fighting as well. I mean, we had Vietnam. That was kind of part of the Cold War. So like the Cold War was a hot war in some ways, and I feel like this right now we're in a cold civil war. That's how I think about it. But there
yeah,
have been
yeah.
breakouts. I mean, I think January 6th, Charlottesville. Like there have been moments where like it turns hot for a couple hours.
I mean, I don't know what's hotter than going after specifically like congressional spending and like and or where there's
Yeah.
a clear like congress where the mandate lies with Congress and like the president just taking over. Like that's a really big one. But also like you
Yeah,
know
we could
on the
talk
camp.
about that one. I have nuanced views on that. I think there's a difference between allocating spending versus not spending money, but that's a different question. It's a little bit off topic, so.
Well, I think that
But
what's
my
okay.
point was just I agree that we're in a civil war. It's a cold civil war, but I agree that we're in a civil war right
And I guess what's interesting is the Civil War through the Battle of Minds. This isn't even the first time this has happened. Like if you go back to like what's happening right now is basically like the Federalist beliefs around like the kind of more aristocratic, strong central leader versus like the Democratic Republican views uh, that it should be
now.
more decentralized. And this is a battle that was waged heavily in early America
Mm,
between
mm,
Jefferson and Hamilton. And it was so they were just like slinging
yeah,
mud at each other. And you'll
yeah.
hear why I think Andreessen is woke on this and why or deep dark woke. I guess
Dark
he's
woke. I like that. Yeah, that's good.
not he's based or red pilled or whatever dark woke.
Based is the term people use. Yeah, which is
He went on
also
this.
kind of cringe. I don't like that word anymore. It's cringe now.
It's cringe now.
I think it
He,
is. That's just my opinion.
he went on this media tour where he talked about the power of propaganda, and he specifically talked about the newspaper wars between Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. And what happened there is like they both created newspapers to just throw shit at each other and like influence public opinion. And Jefferson ended up winning that war, and he won it in large part because he had the editor for one of these newspapers on staff at the White House, so he was bankrolling the situation with government money. And like I find that kind of crazy because now I feel like it's flipped. Like
Mm,
I feel like the Federalists, and like in so many ways, this new rampart are Federalists. Like you look at the Supreme Court folks they put in, and they're all part of the Federalist Society, and they all kind of have very similar beliefs. But I was listening to Charlie Kirk the other day, and he was talking about USAID and why he thinks they're doing it, and it's specifically because his version is that the Federalist perspective is actually the constitutional mandate, and that this is a directly forcing the issue on something that's been put off for like hundreds of years. So um,
yeah. Well, you see, a lot of people in the new right are calling this like a refounding. I've heard people use the term refounding, meaning like let's go back to the way it was by the founders, which is interesting. I mean, I feel like there's some contradictions in the way that this new coalition is actually governing versus like what you might call, because like at one level it's like they're taking the executive and making that way more powerful, like kind of like ramrodding things through and saying like this is what Trump wants, so we're going to do it, and like courts be damned and stuff like that, or like at least that like the courts will be too slow and we're just going to keep moving, right? And we are actually going to be the ones who cut people's paychecks and cut people's uh, network access, right? I mean, like by the time the court rules, like those people already don't have access to their stuff anymore. You know what I mean? So
Sure.
like they're just moving faster. But so at one level, you could be like, this is clearly a like authoritarian move in that like they're concentrating power in the hands of the executive, which I can see that argument. But at the same time, like, okay, what are they concentrating that power in the hands of the executive to do? They're concentrating it in the hands of the executive to reduce the power of the executive by reducing the size of the bureaucracy and by reducing the size of the administrative state and by like reducing the size of the budget. And I mean, you hear the most radical people like Ron Paul in this movement, and they're like, we should get rid of the whole thing and go back. So it's like, is this like a radical, like authoritarian move, or is it actually like a radical anti-authoritarian move? It's
Well,
kind of
the
an interesting
agency.
contradiction because you're taking authoritarian tactics but using them for like anti-authoritarian means or ends, I should say. It's like authoritarian means for anti-authoritarian ends. And I think that's why some people are getting confused and the left is kind of off foot and they don't have a good response to this because as soon as you say like, oh, this is a power grab, it's like, no, we're trying to take away our own power, trying to reduce the power of the presidency through these authoritarian type of tactics. So it's
Well,
it's really fascinating.
let's take a step back there. I mean, is USAID or in the like underneath the executive? That's like an agency that exists on its own, like outside of like it's power. It's earmarked by Congress, like the funds, like and a lot
Fair
of that
enough. Reducing the size of the federal government in general, then I guess, and moving it to the people, which is like moving power down. You're moving power down. You're taking it away from bureaucrats and from Congress people and from presidents, and you're moving it down to the people. So that's
well,
what I mean by anti-authoritarian.
and why people freak out is like there's good criticisms of USAID. I think it's totally overblown. I think it's like a huge media tour personally, but like what the USAID is it was established in order to push neoliberal values in the during like the Cold
That's
War and
right.
post
Yes,
World War II stuff. So it's literally like neoliberalism
definitely.
manifest. And not only that,
Correct.
it's like
That's right. That's right.
it's while it is bipartisan, it's a huge part of the Democratic power base. So like you have like this party that's really worried about authoritarian takeover. Like they basically said they're going to do Project 2025 and like roll it like purge the government, impart loyalists like X, Y, and Z, and like try to do an authoritarian takeover. And then the first thing this group is doing after saying that they were not going to do these things is like doing all the things that they were being accused of, except on steroids. So it kind of makes sense to me that like the left is like freaking out. I don't think people have really articulated why it's scary, but like the the way the government is being weaponized is not to like go after like the biggest, hairiest problems in the country, but it's to go after the power base of the opposition, which is really, I think, very scary. And like the
Yeah,
philosophical,
I mean, yeah, I agree. I agree. It's strange for me because I've been on the left my entire life, and I feel like I'm now not anymore. I don't know if I'm on the right. I might be. I think I tend maybe a little bit more towards that, maybe like 60-40 kind of thing. But like, I'm definitely not a right winger, and I don't plan to be. But like, I feel like growing up, like somebody who was like pushing like neoliberal agenda around the world, like that would have been someone I would see as my enemy. Like let's say like during like the George Bush administration, like that would have been the enemy. Like the people who were trying to force these like neoliberal values on people all over the world. Like that was what the right wing was trying to do. And now
yeah,
I don't know. There's just like there's a lot of confusing things where I'm like, wait, the the it's like you know how like um the planet has like a magnetic pole and then like every like 20,000 years or something it just like
it's like
flips like
flip.
in like 2 days it just goes like reverse. I don't remember the exact physics of why that happens. I learned it at one point, but like it's fascinating that it's so fast, like the flip. And it feels like that's kind of what happened here. It wasn't quite that fast. It was a process of several years, but like relatively speaking, it was pretty fast. And so I feel like it's a little confusing. I don't even know how to think about some of these questions anymore. Like in terms of right, I feel like the right left spectrum has kind of lost its
Yeah,
potency
the value.
because like the idea that Elon Musk is a right winger, I mean, like, yes, of course, in certain ways he is. Like, I understand, like, he's like cozying up to like actual right wingers for sure. But like, he is also like clearly like a futurist radical who like is trying to bring about like a technological utopia. Like, that is like a very like that's not a conservative. You know what I mean? So like, it's just it's very strange. I'm a little
Well,
confused right
he's
now.
certainly a sci like a he certainly has a view of the future, a sci-fi future, but also like what's stopping him from doing that? And what has stopped him? What's his experience been as he's tried to make that a reality?
Uh
Um,
huh.
you know, and what would be the thing that would prevent that? And it's like, okay, if your goal is to get to Mars or whatever, like, and you're being super regulated on like rocket on launches, if you're being constantly attacked uh, 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 in the courts, like, and then the probably the most existential fear to his goals is having effect like effective altruists that get together and make like global alliances that prevent technological progress.
That's
Uh,
right.
uh,
That's what he's fighting. That's what he's fighting.
in
That's
my
what he's
in my
fighting.
opinion, in my opinion, when I just like
He's
bring in
fighting he's fighting Davos and lockdown. Yeah, I think he's fighting like the COVID regime in term not that COVID's still happening, but like the people who decided that that was a good idea. I think that's what he's fighting.
yeah, and there's a lot of good criticisms there, right? Like, and I think that's or should I get through this part really quick?
Yeah, yeah, keep going.
So this is like kind of the tying together in this period of what's going on now, and we've done the backdrop quite a bit, but Peter Thiel talked a
Yeah.
lot about like I no longer believe in my freedom being and democracy uh being compatible, and he talked about seasteading and outer space and all these like sort of like aspects of getting free. Um,
Seasteading, right? That's where you like have a new state out in the ocean, right?
yeah, and like
Right,
in the
right.
network state, they talk about these like sort of like a new like a private colonial, like a private colonial sort of a new
Mm.
a new a new type of way of organizing. But
Yeah, it
everything
seems
he's
like they
said,
kind of view themselves as like almost like pilgrims, the way that like the pilgrims from the 1600s like founded America. It's almost like they kind of see it that way. Like we can do that. We can do that again. In the same way that like Europe was the old world in the 1600s and then like we founded a new world, like they kind of want to do that again. But like there's no more land left, obviously, because we've like mapped every square centimeter of the planet, you know, and decided on zoning laws for every parcel. You know, there's no land left. And so they have to do it through like a digital kind of sphere, but there's still requirements of like, yeah, we also need some land. Yeah, it's a really interesting movement, like the biology stuff.
yeah, the I find it very intriguing that all the PayPal guys are South African, like ex-Afrikaners or whatever, like
Mm.
not making, whatever. But
Is there some connection there, or because I feel like they all left when they were like small, right? Like David Sachs is a South African, but he left when he was like 6 or something. Um,
well, I mean, that's just like a very colonial philosophy. Like, if you grow up in that environment, in the 90s, you have all the way up to the
right.
90s, you have apartheid. So you're just gonna, I mean, it's a little, it seems a little like a lot of the stuff is on the nose. It's like, oh, these kids who grew up on like at like a mine in like in like an apartheid state, like have colonial beliefs, like it's and what there's certainly nothing problematic there. Um, um, I don't understand why we give these people the benefit of the doubt. Like, I guess that's the question. Is it's like, why do these people get the
um,
benefit?
I think that's a good question. I think that's a really good question. I think like so I heard someone talking, I think you actually sent me this, of like that guy saying like it was funny, it was like a little song and he was talking about how it's a kakistocracy, which means rule by the least effective. Now, if you have like Stephen Miller or even Donald Trump himself, I can see that argument. Like these are not, I mean, I think Trump has like a very specific type of genius, but like he's not competent in the basic sense of the word. His first term was an absolute horror show of incompetence, in my opinion. Um, and so, yeah, like these are the dumbest, most incompetent people there are at some level. I can see that. But like when you try to apply that argument to someone like Elon Musk, like no, like this is one of the most competent, like argue a very clear argument that he's the most competent human on the planet. And so I think when it comes to giving people the benefit of the doubt, I think it's like, okay, let's look at what they've accomplished. Like Mark Andreessen like invented the web browser and then like is the most successful venture capitalist in Silicon Valley and like founded like dozens of like tech unicorns that transformed culture. Like, okay,
Yeah,
like this is clearly not a dummy. This is clearly not someone who doesn't know things. This is clearly not someone who got lucky. This is someone who is extremely smart and understands the world at a very deep level better than 99.999% of people. Now, whether he deserves to be empowered to the degree that he is, say, for example, with Elon, just because he knows how to catch a rocket with chopsticks, like, okay, I don't know. Maybe that doesn't make him deserving of like high power, but at another level, it kind of does. It's like, okay, like, if we had to pick from a random hat somebody to do things, like this seems like a reasonable choice. You know, this is clearly not a kakistocracy here. So I think that's why they get the benefit of the doubt is that they've actually accomplished incredible
yeah, yeah.
feats.
I meant more so on like the coverage of like this sort of sketchier, like the overall, some of the overall political movement, or even like when something really crazy happens, like when some of these guys have gone on media tours to talk about the great replacement theory, about how Democrats are
That's
imparting like
gross. That's
you
gross.
know
And then Joe Rogan is
authority.
just like nodding along, like fucking so dumb. Like Joe Rogan's like, yeah, you're probably right. It's like, dude, like what?
No, I mean he's not like, oh, you're so right. He's like literally waiting for John Fetterman to come and like attacking him about it. Like it's like amplifying these beliefs that come from a very clearly come from a dark place. Like I saw them bubble up and like it's been
Yeah,
whitewashed. And so you have some of these people with the largest platform. You know, Elon, I don't know. Does Elon Musk have more followers than any person on social media ever? And like, does he get more
right.
impressions than anybody ever? Like, there's like
Yeah,
there's like and then we've talked about how people don't have reasoning ability, probably. Like there's got to be some moral imperative. Like, so this guy who's constantly promoting content that like scapegoats people and it's just like a abject lie, like why does he get the benefit of you talk about the media tour, he's made like 1,000 near reactionary dog whistles. So when he gets on stage and does like the Kyle, why literally everyone's like, you're
right.
crazy if you think, like anyone on the center is like, you're absolutely insane if you think that he did a Nazi salute. Like, and my question is like, why does he get the benefit of the doubt there? I guess on the social cultural issues.
Um, that's interesting. I mean, I think it gets to a question of like, how do we assess someone's reputation and like what is worthy of, like, what makes someone worthy of respect, I guess. Like, I don't necessarily respect Elon Musk as like a whole person because I think he's made too many stupid mistakes. And they're not even mistakes, they're just like immoral things that he's talked about and trumpeted. So I agree with you there. Like, he's definitely not clean in any stretch of the word. He's he's played with fire a lot, a lot. But at the same time, it's like, okay, but like he also like massively bent the cost curve down on batteries to the point where it's like a huge factor in driving climate change. Like, okay, like that's a thing he did. He like he built like solar roofs. Okay, that was cool. Like he like and the list goes on, man. Like there's like Neuralink. He's like solving like paralyzed people's ability to move. Like that's amazing. Like he's doing so many things. He's like trying to solve traffic by like burrowing under the ground with like tunnels. Like that one doesn't seem like it's succeeded yet, but like at least it's better than the $100 billion California rail. So like I think in a world where we've seen like the state capacity like diminish, like during World War II or post-war, like the state could actually do awesome shit. Like we could actually build tunnels, like and build the interstate highway system like effectively and efficiently. Now our state capacity is absolute trash for a lot of reasons. But like in a world where that's the case, and then you have this guy who's like coming in and actually just solving problems. He's like, these are the most important problems in the world. I'm going to just directly solve them. We need batteries, we need solar, we need uh, space travel. Like, and he actually did it. He actually fucking did it. So like to me, that gives him a huge like bank of credibility on this one side, even though he also has like way too much, way more on the other side for me to feel completely comfortable with him for sure. But like, I don't know. That's my view on him. It's like this is an incredibly impressive person, and he did it again with Doge. I mean, he went at he's. I think his one unique skill is asking the most leveraged question possible. That's what he's good at. And so he went to Washington, and most people would have gone to Washington and like sat in committee with like a bunch of Congress people or like schmoozed and figured out who like the power brokers were, and then like how can it right? But Elon was like, where are the wire transfers all going? Like that's the first question he fucking asks, and he just goes right to it, and then everyone starts freaking out because he just asked the question that no one has asked before. Like, so I don't know.
I mean, I would love if he did that to the thing that makes me like. I agree. I'll back up. I mean, like I think the thing that's interesting about all of this is all like, and why I love the Lord of the Rings so much, and
Mm,
it's so intriguing because all these guys are obsessed with Lord of the Rings. But Lord of the Rings is really a story about moral relativism, and like
mm,
it's really hard to say who's the good guy and the bad guy in anything. And I think there's something really important there, but it's also mainly a tale against the power of concentrate against like power concentration and the evils of power concentration and like the need for
mm,
mutuality. So there's a lot of
mm,
interesting stuff
mm.
there in relation to this very
Yeah,
specific thing.
right.
Uh, I guess talking, we haven't talked too much about this alliance and what they all do believe and what they don't believe. And I think the intriguing, I don't know where I'm taking this, but it's just I remember we had an open thread. Um, they all sort of believe in attacking the current order and the current like bureaucracy and the current like
Yes.
sort of uh, the establishment, but for very different reasons. You have like the Christian nationalists who want to rebuild
Mm,
country in the image of God. You have like
right.
the neo-reactionary sort of like crowd who wants to like rebuild the country in the image of a corporation. And then you
Mm.
have like sort of the pure hardcore libertarians that want to get rid of the notion of the state whatsoever. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Right. That's a really good breakdown. I agree. But they
um,
all have the common enemy is USAID, basically.
yeah, so it's, I mean, and this is like an incredibly volatile group, as you're saying, like
Mm.
some of the most executionally competent people in the entire world. Like you're seeing how they're doing the executive rollout stuff. It is like, to me, it's like, it's like they've had this, they strategize to the T. They probably have the whole, like every conditional property probability or like conditional
Yeah.
situation mapped out. Like you look at even how
Yeah.
Doge is just rolling
Definitely.
in it. This is the
Definitely.
real deal. And then also, I
Definitely.
guess, we're talking about like the actual the actual conditions that like where the truth of all this stuff comes from is like there has been a lot of reasons for people to be upset and the moral relativism here like there's
Right.
been a lot of people feel very attacked by like cancel culture or social justice
Yeah.
um of
Or they're
course to
just
the
tired of it. They're just like bored of it. They're just like, really? Another person that I used to like 10 years ago, and now you're going to tell me he's bad or she's bad? Like, they just get tired of it after a while. They're like, fuck you. Like, it's okay to like things, Like, it's okay to laugh sometimes. And yes, I understand that not everyone's fucking perfect. Neither are you. Neither am I? So I feel like that, um, the moral clarity on that is very strong, I think, for people. And I think that's actually the motivating force behind most of the energy behind this movement is comes from that. It's like a
Yeah,
backlash against. I mean, you look at what Elon's doing. I mean, he talks about like the woke mind virus. I think that's what he's fighting more than anything else.
I mean, he to me the most. I mean, I obviously have different perspectives, but I think the most woke mind virus he's talking about is like is like egalitarian beliefs and neoliberalism, but and I view it as
Interesting. Interesting.
like
Yeah.
I guess there's kind of like a natural thing here. It's like you want to decentralize to a certain degree to avoid power concentration, but eventually there becomes too much gunk. And so like also like a
Right.
traffic
Oh, yeah. Right.
mechanism is really good just for like I think it probably makes sense that we just get in here and like tear shit out to a certain degree. Like it's probably really good for the overall like I don't know from like a systems perspective.
Yes.
Like
I agree. I agree. I think that's why I'm more in favor of Doge than I probably would be on paper, like in the abstract. If I were just like, if 10 years ago you just told me what people were doing, I would probably have a lot more reservations about it. But in reality, I'm kind of like cheering it on because like I feel like it's going to be hard for the left to be then in the position of defending the status quo because I think there's very few people who actually think that that's working for them. Like defending
yeah,
all of these institutions that have clearly failed. They gave us all of these massive catastrophes. They gave us the banking crisis in 2008. They gave us like Ebola outbreaks. They gave like all kind COVID lockdown. Like it just the list goes on and on. I mean, it's massive.
I
Inflation. There's so many. You could list it for 10 minutes. All the things. The war, the foreign wars. Like, and so for the left to now be the one who's defending that system, that's a really tough place for them to be. So going back to the beginning of our conversation in terms of where does the left go, they're going to have a credible position that is like bringing together their different coalitions, but that doesn't just like defend like the deep state essentially because
yeah,
nobody likes that shit. Everyone fucking hates it, man. The left hates it, in some ways hates it even more, you know? So
the
it's a
real
very
one.
awkward position that the left is in right now, to be
Yeah, they lost
defending
the
that
moral.
and just being like, we need to make sure that everyone in government like doesn't feel anxious by like being interviewed by Doge. There was this article in Politico the other day, that yesterday I think, that was said, uh, anxiety provoking. That was like the quote by like the bureaucrat who had to sit with the Doge people and explain what they do at work. Like it's like, okay, so you're saying that you shouldn't have to have any anxiety about anyone ever asking you what do you do to justify yourself. Like what? Like no one who's ever had a real job thinks that way. Like of course you have to justify yourself every quarter. You have to or even every week. You have to be like, is this still working? Are we doing the right stuff? So I feel like, yeah, for the Democrats
What
to then be defending those people is going to be really unpopular for them.
what I found really funny on that note, um, uh, is the Curtis Yarvin, he was just in New York Times, and they were talking to him about his like thoughts of government employees, and like obviously he wants to trash everything. But what I didn't realize is that his parents were government employees, and so
Interesting.
I was like, isn't that a little too on the nose from a Freudian perspective? And I didn't really talk about this, but like, I think it's so interesting. A lot of these guys in government, no offense to folks out here, if people like anyone, if you end up watching this who does believe in like a very strong corporate state or like, executive branch, these specific people all have insane daddy issues for the most part. Like,
Mm,
no one here has like,
mm.
uh, and I think from a Freudian perspective, that's very intriguing.
I agree.
Uh,
I agree.
so um,
They're all
uh,
certainly rule breaker. They're all rule breakers, and they're all like radicals in some way. And I feel like they're all kind of broken people at a deeper level. I agree with that.
yeah, yeah, it's I mean, not everybody. I mean, everyone. I don't know. Maybe they are broken. I don't really look at like JD Vance and think he's like a broken human.
That's true.
He's kind of just
That's a good.
seems like
That's a good counterexample. I shouldn't say all. I shouldn't say all, but many of the people. I mean, I look at someone like RFK Jr. That is clearly a broken. I mean, I love the guy. Honestly, I really do. I think he's great in terms of like shaking the system up. I mean, we'll see what happens, but I could be eating my words in a few years, but I hope not. And I think that our health system is bad enough that I'm willing to take some risks. But like when I just look at him as a human being, like he's clearly like a very broken man. He's like struggled with massive addiction problems. He watched his family get destroyed. He like has a lot of anger issues, clearly. He is like very like he's like a true cowboy, and he just like has very high risk tolerance. He just like says whatever is on his mind. He's a true like he's a broken guy. Like he's not someone you would be like I want to be like him like psychologically. Like he seems like he's not a happy person, and then you could list 10 or 20 other people in Trump's orbit that are like that. Like Trump does not attract people who are grounded and confident and stable. He attracts the opposite. He attracts people that are pretty broken and I don't know, seem kind of like
Motivated.
internally chaotic.
Yeah. Um, it's certainly intriguing. Um, I find it. Oh, so this is going back to why people are justified to hate the Democratic Party, as well. We were just talking about like when you actually look at how it's constructed, like the like it is kind of profoundly elitist, and it's grown like
Yeah.
exponentially profoundly elitist, like with
Yeah.
especially, I mean, for me, the biggest thing that has destroyed most of all of government has been Citizens United and the ability for
Yeah.
corporations to essentially have limitless power. And I think it's especially hurt the Democratic Party because they already had a big corporate base. They were already not like as big of a grassroots movement. So, you know, the corporate, I don't know, like the corporate consultant class is like dictating 100% of what this party believes. And all these like folks who went to the elite schools and are in effective altruism and like all these NGOs and shit. And so, um,
Right. Right.
you
Super
know, like,
strong. Super strong. And that's why like the DEI stuff feels like it's just really interesting. Like it's claiming to be like helping the most subjugated, but it's actually just like a massively corporatized thing. It's very strange. And then like there's totally like a DEI pipeline where like you take someone who studied these things and then they can get a job at like McKinsey consulting people about these topics and then getting kickbacks. There's like this whole network of elitism that yeah, I strongly agree. I strongly agree.
I don't know that stuff very well, to be quite honest.
I'm
But
not an expert either. I'm not an expert either, but I've just seen little tastes of it in my own personal career and just hearing people talk about it like in their world. The Democratic Party is strongly elitist, which is also a new thing. I don't feel like it was like that. I think it started
yeah,
with Obama, but like the
sorry.
Bill Clinton
Well,
era it wasn't like that at all, but it started with Obama. Remember they used to attack him for like eating um like fancy salads or whatever. And it's just like, I always was like, this is so stupid. But now I kind of understand why that was like a proxy for like, you are not for the people. It's like, but I feel like that's just accelerated significantly in the past 5 years.
I mean, the Supreme Court equated money with freedom of speech. So by doing that, they basically,
Right. Right.
you know, made it pretty clear that not all people are equal, um, and
Right.
what the measure was there. So, and who has power influence here. So, I mean, I think that's kind of, and so many things like, when you talk about liberal democracy, not just the Democratic Party, but liberalism in the world, like, we have Vietnam, uh, we have Iraq, which, obviously awful, but we also have all of the IMF
Yeah.
economic structures that have like unilaterally emboldened the United, like empowered the US. Like, I don't know if you know about how like producer nations like got the money to like have economic progress, but it was all based upon like essentially, you know, one, having democratic governments, and two, becoming producer states for for the US. So, and people have been locked
Yeah.
into this like world order for a long time. And not just that, but like globalism, when Bill Clinton like pulled, accelerated offshoring, that was massively
Mm.
impactful for the US economy, but it was destructive for the average person. Like corporate earnings went through the roof,
Yeah.
but
Yes.
like
Yes.
no one no one got that stock buybacks. Why should companies be able to like artificially inflate their stock power, especially when you tie that into the Fed, who's pumping liquidity by killing rates? Like it's just like that's
Yeah.
all designed to enrich like the very
Yeah.
wealthy. So people are fucking
Yeah. Well,
pissed. And then
this is why you got Trump and Bernie in 2016 because of the failures of these policies. I would call this like the simplest way to think about it is like the Hillary Clinton arm of the party, and basically indebting all of these foreign countries to the U.S. through like IMF loans that are paybackable in dollars, as far as I understand it. I'm not a
yeah,
strong expert on that, but like I believe they basically structured all of that debt in dollars, which is then designed to dollarify the world and make the dollar super strong and obviously enhance our reserve status. But then as a result of that, then American exports are super expensive. And so American manufacturing takes a massive hit. And we have to offshore everything because the dollar is too strong. Everyone wants the dollar. And so we can't really sell our goods on the global market. And so we don't make anything anymore. We just do services and tech. And everything became tech and finance.
and now that's getting
And
automated and offshored. So good fucking luck.
yeah, yeah. So I feel like the left has to find a message that is against that institutional structure while still like remaining true to like the leftist values, and kind of like those movement bases that you have there in terms of environmentalist, labor, and progressive movements. It's true, it has to be true to those, obviously, but it also has to be against the kind of globalist economic shakedown that has
Yeah,
happened.
yeah. I mean, I think what's so crazy is, I mean, yeah, this clearly shit needs to fix too. It's like, okay, if we run a $2 trillion deficit for a few years, like that's going to be really bad. And like,
Yeah,
I don't think
yeah,
anyone's realized. I mean, dude, I think we could be. I'm very. I'm about max long possible right now in the stock market, but it's a fear of missing out position because I think like tariffs, like deportations, I could see very easily a world with 10 or 15% inflation next year. If that happens with this
interesting.
level of debt, it's going to be a fucking explode. It's going to be an implosion.
Yeah.
It's going to
Well, that's
be
when we get hyper. That's when we get hyper. Tell me if I'm wrong. You know more about it, macro than I do. But isn't that when we get hyperinflation, right? Because
you. I mean,
you can't raise interest rates because then the debt will be 140% of the federal budget or whatever, and
so you
then
print more
so you
money.
can't, yeah, and then your debt gets worse, right? It's the cycle. That's what Ray Dalio is talking about. So his target was 3% debt to GDP ratio. So 3% deficit as a portion of GDP, which for the US right now is 1 trillion. So we have to cut it in half. And that's the number that Elon's been talking about too. And Elon's been talking about zero inflation in 2025. I think that's actually his, we talked about the DEI and
Zero
kind of
inflation.
the yeah, that's what he's talked about is zero inflation. That's his goal is that if the government doesn't spend, basically, if economic growth is larger than the government debt, then the inflation should be extremely low. That's his view, and that's what he's trying to go for, and that's why he came up. At first, he said 2 trillion because that's the deficit, but now he's cut it back to 1 trillion, um, which is to get us into that 3% target that Dahlia talks about, to avoid basically that debt spiral from happening. But I think we're
Yeah,
actually extremely. I think we're closer to that than people realize. Like it's not very far off. Like if we have like some major catastrophes where like whatever's happening to the price of eggs right now happens across the board. Let's say for example energy becomes massively more expensive for some like global shock reason. Then now the price of everything gets higher, and now you have to raise interest rates. And now the servicing of the U.S. debt becomes like 100% of the budget, and now you have to print money and the debt gets even worse and it happens very quickly.
I don't
um
really, I don't really understand what. the beef is with just throwing on like insane corporate, not insane, but like a relatively reasonable corporate tax rate. We have one of the lowest corporate tax rates in the entire world. Like
Yeah.
the it's at an all-time low. GDP has exploded. Wages have stayed pretty much the same. The earnings of the 1% have gone up like 25x, while the average person has barely
Yeah.
gone up in 30 fucking years. Like,
Yeah.
why are people so allergic to taxation in this country? I think everyone thinks they're going to be a billionaire someday. Like, people just need to get fucking real about that, in my opinion.
I don't.
Um,
I think I think higher corporate tax rates is one of the more efficient ways to raise revenue. I do think there is a real effect where you raise the rates and you don't raise as much money as you think because people move the money around. They like offshore it to
yeah,
Bahamas or
but
whatever. Like they just it becomes like a pressure, and they take the pressure elsewhere, and so it becomes harder to enforce. And you actually I saw a chart where it was like basically like total government revenues as a portion of GDP. And it was interesting. And it was a chart that showed that, but then it also showed the actual marginal tax rates for income tax, I think. But I think corporate taxes have moved similarly a lot. But basically, the income tax rates were moving all over the place. Like they were 90% in like the 50s. And
overall
then they
tax
were like,
rate
but the
1%.
overall revenue that the government takes in as a portion of GDP was like it was within like a 10% bar, maybe even like a 5% band. It was like 23% of GDP goes to the federal government, like every fucking year. And maybe sometimes it's 18 and that's really low. And sometimes it's 24 and that's like, it doesn't change that much. So like basically what it is like we have to just spend within that range. Like we have to spend within that range. Otherwise we will have a debt spiral at some point. Like to me,
What
it's
what's
that simple.
what I wonder there though is like when you look at GDP relative or tax rate relative to the GDP or tax receipts relative to GDP, the U.S. is sort of at the lower end, and and the
Okay,
places
fair enough.
that are in that wheelhouse are generally like either totalitarian governments or like with very few services or like very poor
Right.
countries. So like I'm like,
You could
what's
be
going on?
right. I'm not educated. I'm not educated enough on that. I would love to see data. That's a really interesting data question. Maybe like deep research could ask, you could ask it that of like, show me the chart of like GDP as a portion of tax receipts as a portion of GDP over time for all of like the top like 25 nations on Earth or something like that. That would be a really interesting chart to look at. Um, I don't know the answer to that. But my understanding is like, even if we are at the lower end of that, it's like, okay, maybe we can go from like 20% to like 24 or something. But like, it's not going to go to like 60. Like, it's just not. And so, like, you have to spend within your means at some level. So
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think it needs to be both. I think it needs to be tax increases in a way that is targeted to not, hurt the economy, plus deregulation, which hopefully should increase economic growth, plus cutting spending. And you have to do all three at the same time, in my view. Otherwise, you won't solve this problem. But none of those are like that whole package is not super popular. What people want is tax cuts uh, plus more spending. That's what people always want.
yeah.
So
I mean, they did it under Clinton. They increased the tax rate. They cut spending. It was kind of like Democratic president, Republican Congress, but
right,
much more balanced. But like
right,
how we've solved it since has been, in my opinion, I think for a long time we ran interest rates uh, underneath the growth rate. And if you really think about what
mm,
that is, that's like a silent trying to silently create a solution here. It's trying to grow our way out of the debt. Um,
mm,
and
right,
it instead what we got was just like insane. We got inflation, and
yeah.
that's you know maybe that's a criticism of the Fed or whatever. Um, but what was I gonna say? Yeah, I feel like the subject fixing the debt is like every man's like hidden passion, and like it's like the Roman Empire thing. Uh,
I mean, I think it is one of the biggest. If I had to list like the top three like threats to the United States right now, I would say it might be number one, but it's certainly top three.
I
In
mean,
terms of like threats to the country, it's like probably the number one thing. Because what happens after that? Okay, you have a debt spiral, you have runaway inflation, you have 26% inflation every year, or 78%. Like it could get even worse. It could go Argentina, it could go parabolic. Because the problem with it is that the only solution you have makes it worse. The two solutions you have are raising interest rates and printing money.
Or
And then
austerity.
those two things both make it worse.
If you go austerity, like
Austerity,
then,
true. Yes, that's the third. That's the third. Yeah.
but then you get
But
voted
I'd rather
out.
do that now. I'd rather do that now rather rather than when we need to do it. I'd rather do it now rather than like during the actual hyperinflation.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. But then I would also not have inflationary policies. Like a trade war
I
is
agree. I
inflationary.
agree. Oh, I
Like
totally agree, man. I totally agree.
before
That shit is so stupid. It's like do
inflation,
Doge, but don't do the tariffs. Like fucking what? Why are you doing tariffs right now? I mean, I think it was kind of cool that he got like certain concessions. It was like in terms of like political theater, it was like entertaining to see that he like proposed the tariff and then like Colombia like was like, okay, we will take the plane of criminals. Like no problem. Like that was hilarious. But like as a policy, especially when we're trying to deal with this debt issue as the number one thing, like terrible policy. Like why the fuck are you doing that right now? Like this is so stupid. This is such bad timing for that.
yeah, and I think I mean, maybe it just is like his, like brinkmanship is the name of the game for Trump or
Yes,
something. But like someone's gonna call the bluff right now, and like we might find out the emperor has no
that's right.
foes, and it might get really bad at some point. Like,
That's right.
you know, we've not like we kind of gotten we smoked Iraq's normal army in like 3 days, but then we can't even hold Baghdad. It's like, is our army, and it's been,
Mm.
a long time since we've had like significant combat experience. Like, what's going to happen if the U.S. gets in an actual conflict? Like, is it going to be the sort of
Oh yeah.
dominant, dominant situation that most Americans believe it's going to be, or is it going to be like, you know, a rude awakening? So, we're threatening to
Yeah, that's a separate issue. That's a separate issue. I mean, I'm hoping that Doge is just being systematic about it and is able to just cut like basically it's like Trump's administration fighting with itself, meaning like Doge is on one end and then you have the tariffs and the other stupid inflationary shit on the other side. Especially like tariffs on like AI chips. Like that's like the most deflationary technology we have, and then you're trying to tariff it. Like what? So like, hopefully, like that battle internally within the administration can be won by the people who are actually cutting spending, and we can end up. I don't know. It's just like it's annoying that we have to. I don't know. The tariff thing is so stupid. But honestly, if I'm being honest, I actually think when it comes down to it, Trump will pick. Ultimately, it's going to be Trump's choice to make that call. He will pick tariffs over cutting. And so that sucks, man. That fucking sucks.
Yeah, I mean, I would like what I would become a Trump stan legitimately if he truly went off the military after the military industrial complex, because it seems
Yeah,
crazy that like, and why
yeah.
I'm like the reason I'm very concerned when they go after stuff like USAID is, one, it kind of advances US's goals anyways, but two, it's the Democratic power base, so it's like very much just feels targeted. Three, it
Mm.
forces the issue on the Federalist issues, etc. And four, it's just probably the most important thing, is just not important in the grand scheme of things. 1% of the entire GDP, but you have the military industrial complex, and it's like,
I don't know. It adds up. It adds up. It's like 10% or like it's like 8% as big as the military budget. That's a lot. Like it's pretty significant. It's $50 billion a year. The idea that 50 billion is not a lot of money. I mean, that's like $400 per taxpayer per year. That means you can go out with to dinner with your entire family like every couple months. That's a lot of money for people. Like that's a lot of money. Like we could go to Disneyland. If you live in LA and you have a family of five, like we could all go to Disneyland. But no, I'm spending it on like sending it to like Mozambique. Like why? So it's I think there's like a populist messaging issue when people say things like $50 billion is not a lot of money. Like regular people are just gonna like cough
well,
up their food and be like,
I'm
"Are
talking
you fucking kidding me? $50 billion is not a lot of money. Like, what are we talking about here?" Like,
I mean, just in terms of achieving the actual goals of the US and on a relative basis, like, okay, Like you're talking about
Well,
things that might,
if you do one of those, if you do one of those a month for a year and a half, that's $1 trillion.
there's not, but that's the thing is like, that's like the biggest, one of the bigger things that's not the defense budget.
Right. Yeah.
And like what,
Well, he's going
it
after the
is,
Pentagon next. He's going Pentagon next. The Pentagon is next
that's,
on the list, so we'll see what
that's what they
happens.
say, but we'll see, because USAID, like it's kind of a perfect storm to like stick the Twitter mob on. One, they already are kind of reactionary and
Hmm.
hate Democrats to begin with.
Right.
Two, the whole thing is above board. It's just out there, so people can look at every single connection and like go to town
Mm-hmm.
on trying to figure out what it means. But the fucking
Mm.
Pentagon, you can't even audit the Pentagon. It's failed like 10 audits in a row. There's no
Right.
transparency. Like, and they're
Right.
spending like I think it's way more than 10%, 10x USAID. So like,
Yeah, I
you
think it's
know,
like 15. I think it's 15x or so. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think that this is the biggest test for Doge and probably the biggest test of Elon's life is whether he can successfully step one audit and step two like trim the Pentagon. And if he could
and
do
how get
that, if
assassinated and
Elon can do if Elon can actually trim the Pentagon in a meaningful way, that I would say Elon is the most competent person we've had in like 100 years. If he can do that, like holy shit, man. Because like I agree with you, that is a really, really complex challenge. But I feel like he has people around him that I feel optimistic. I feel like there's at least a 50% chance that he can do it.
yeah, and well, this is my other argument in relation to tariffs is we're hoping to tariff people in relation and hope that our manufacturing capacities will fill the gaps. But in actually, when I actually talk to manufacturers, what they tell me mostly, and I'm not an expert here, I might be wrong. I'd love if people know manufacturers, but they just work in aerospace and defense, and there's almost no economic incentive to work in anything else. Like the difference between
Mm,
manufacturing for space and defense is like a power, like an order of magnitude, and all the way up the chain, you get to set your price. So you have like
mm,
10 layers who are subcontractors for Raytheon and all this shit. And
right,
they're all just like, we talk about the welfare state, like, well, maybe it's the fact that we have like an insane bidding mechanism for our largest chunk of government and people are taking
right,
from it with no audits. Like,
right.
so,
Yes,
and,
that's
and,
right.
and Eisenhower, literally is talking about the establishment of the military industrial complex and how he made that the most important thing to talk about it in his when he
Yeah,
left government.
I think
So
it's our biggest chance. It's our biggest chance to fight it right now than we've ever had in probably 100 years. Really, since the invention of that entire I mean, before FDR, we didn't really have a federal government that was anywhere like the one we have now. Or really, before I think it was more like World War One, like Woodrow Wilson kind of like started the income tax and started these like international. So I feel like we're going back to like the year 1900. Like that's kind of what I feel like Trump represents. A lot of people think he wants to go back to 1950 in terms of like the social and like race relations, which you could make an argument for that. But I think in terms of the economic policy, he wants to go back to the, like turn of the century, like where we had tariffs, we didn't have an income tax, we didn't have these globalist institutions, and we didn't have the military industrial complex. So Trump is not an intellectual; he doesn't think that way. But I genuinely think that there's a chance. I think that the auditing and skimming reduction in the Pentagon's budget is going to happen soon. It's going to happen in the next like 2 months or less. And I think this is by far the biggest test of Trump 2.0. Like if he
yeah,
succeeds here, he will be a successful president. If he does not, he probably will be mixed to negative in terms of his impact, and potentially quite negative. If he, for example, if he doesn't succeed with Doge, he fires Elon or whatever, and then he also does all the tariffs, and then we have very high inflation, and then the debt spiral actually happens under Trump, like in 2027 or whatever. Like that's a real possibility, and that could for sure happen, and would definitely fuck him over, and he would be like 14% approval rating or something, you know? Um,
yeah, he's got to make bold moves, and it's either gonna. I mean, I hope like who's gonna get scapegoated then? I don't know. We'll see.
yeah.
Um, but just in talking about the world, like you know, this stuff obviously kind of came to a head to where we are now. It's still talking about the tech, backing back out to the tech thing, just finishing this up. Um, we this is just a small portion of everyone who went hard for MAGA, um, and really, the confounding evidence that Elon Musk is in on the bit, um, of the dark corners of the internet and where we are now. This is kind of, I guess, what we're talking about now.
Yeah,
Um, like
that's right.
actually mowing down our institutions and fixing shit, the toxic institutions, without destroying the good ones.
Yeah, I mean, I
Um,
kind of see it as like a forest fire, right? And they always say like a forest fire, then there's new growth and like everything can grow again, and that's great. But also like you can burn down a town, or a city. So I think it's like you were playing with fire. I think that
yeah, and
I
then
think that the Trump 2.0 more than 1.0, I feel. Trump 2.0 is very high variance, meaning like it's either going to be very successful or very unsuccessful. I don't really see a middle ground, honestly.
yeah, I mean, maybe, I mean, I guess one thing that could be true is that like the deep state is so deep that it is able to just somehow bring the gears to a grind again, and things just go
Mm,
like normal, but it
mm,
doesn't really feel
mm.
like that way. It feels like they're about to like break the levees.
I don't think the deep state is as deep as people think. I mean, what is the deep state? It's basically just a bunch of bureaucrats who think that they shouldn't have to answer the question of what did you do in the past year that's useful. That's what the deep state is. Like, I don't think they're that competent, man. They really aren't.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just like the notion of so many systems existing that create so many checks and balances, like that's maybe what the deep
Mm,
state is. And then the fears. I mean, I think in Balaji's perspective, that like this would be sort of like the approach to creating cognitive hegemony, which would be social media warfare,
mm,
like continuing to build up like alternate reality sources. Like, I've kind of been scared about the war on truth, especially in, how my fear that reasoning is potentially not there. Either is not like a thing people have, or it's certainly on the decline of society. But like,
right.
Trump has made such a thing of like attacking the media and discrediting the media as much as humanly possible while creating his version of truth, literally. Um,
Totally.
um, they're trying to root out the institutions that have created the neoliberal order, like going after research, going after like
Mm.
any form of alternative history, or any form of like basically applying revisionist history, trying to pull all the colonial shit from the textbooks, like you know,
Yeah, they're trying to go back to they're trying to change the history books for sure. I think that the science thing was more around like reducing the amount of overhead that like these grants allow for. So like reducing it from like 20%, from like 60% overhead to like 20%, which to me, like if you can't do it for 20% overhead, like what are you doing? Why do we need 60% overhead? So I'm super in favor of that. But I do think that there's like a deeper strategy in terms of changing the knowledge base of the country. And that makes me a little more concerned for sure. Hopefully it's kind of reined in. And I think there's kind of a distributed power structure on like textbook writers, for example, for like elementary school kids. Like, I don't think there's like one bureau that just decides, although maybe there is. I don't know. I'm not an expert on that. So I'm hoping
yeah,
that
and
like that's the kind of deep state that you want. Like, you don't want one company that makes all the decisions about all the textbooks for everyone, and then you can just take over that company and just change it, or whatever, or that board or whatever. I don't know how centralized that kind of stuff is. I really don't.
and you want like a lot of media platforms, like you want more Twitters,
Right?
you want like I want TikTok to exist. To me, TikTok is like by far the
Yeah.
most free of the channels when I use it. Like,
Mm,
um, and I really view this as the next war, as being like co-opting
Mm.
the China-US tensions to like ban basically any form of alternative information. Um,
I
and
agree
then
with
it's like
that. I agree with that. And the two sides are doing it for different reasons. Like the right is doing it because they want like Trumpist messages on like True Social and X. And then the left is doing it because they don't want competition with like the Washington Post or whatever. Like they're both kind
I
of aligned in it for different reasons, I feel.
and that's like the moral relativism too, right? Like because like Biden had his chance to save TikTok, and Biden could have not pushed the bill through. It's kind of tough because the TikTok bill was like fast tracked to get Ukraine aid. So it is a little tough, but it's like
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
can't really complain about like state capture when you're the ones voting to ban platforms as well. So
Yeah.
uh,
Mhm.
I don't know. And then I think there's so much to fear. Like these people in so many ways have talked about like the fact that they want to like reimagine this country in a different image, and they have a strategy to do it, and they presumably look like they're doing it. I mean, I don't know what
Yeah.
like
I agree.
so I don't
These are like
know.
the this is like the cultural concern. Here, go back one side. This is like the cultural conservative movement that's been around, or like they used to call them like movement conservatives. So these are the people who like put George W. Bush in office and like banned stem cell research because they thought it
Heritage
was like
Foundation.
a baby. Yeah, I believe that was Heritage. Maybe I'm getting that wrong. But I'm just
Yeah,
speaking more in
yeah,
terms of like that.
like
This is like
national
my
conservative.
grandparents were like heavy into this stuff, like focus on the family, like very right wing. My parents were both way more left wing and are, but my grandparents were like
Right.
super worried about like gays in the media, like stuff like that.
This is
And that is a
this is
huge part of the right wing. It's probably like the biggest block of voters in the right
this is
wing
your
are these like,
granddaddy's Republican
yeah,
Party.
yeah,
Just
exactly.
yeah.
That's right.
Uh,
And they are definitely going to get goodies out of this. I mean, all of the like the Steve Bannon like Trump 1.0 stuff was new and was not related to this, but this group got a lot of goodies out of Trump 1.0. And Trump 2.0 is also different with like Elon Musk and RFK and stuff. But like RFK and Elon Musk are not this, obviously. But like these people will definitely get a lot of goodies out of that. And I think that especially because they are cutting back all these departments, and then they're going to be able to put their own people in there, and so they have more control over that stuff in this
yeah,
particular moment. I feel I agree with you.
yeah, and I mean, like on Trump's team, you have to pass a loyalty test. There's like a religious question, like when did you have your MAGA awakening? Like,
Oh my god,
it's
that's horrible.
and
That's
that's
cringe.
that's not broadly for the government, but they've talked about stuff like that, and like you see the types of people that Trump puts in are like the loyalists, the people who are going to not say no. It's the Cash Patels of the world. So
Right.
it's it's a
Yeah.
little
Although
scary.
I mean, doesn't every president do that? Doesn't every president? I mean, nobody like. I don't think any president puts in people who hate them. I mean, I don't.
Well, I
I
mean,
feel I'm concerned about like there's a constitutional crisis and there's nobody who says no. I share that concern, but also like, isn't that just politics? I mean, who gets elected on a mandate and then is like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put in all of my political enemies who hate my guts. Like, no, like why would you do that?
yeah, but I mean, like this time he didn't make the choice of like, and maybe because he just didn't need to, but he didn't like run with Mike Pence. You know what I'm saying? Like the type
Fair
of
enough.
guy,
Yeah,
the type of like establishment dude who's gonna like be like, oh, maybe I shouldn't like fail to ratify our results, or like
yeah, fair enough. No, fair
or
enough.
they
I agree.
they
I
they
agree.
made they embarrassed Mike Milley. Like they they removed
Yeah,
Mike Milley, the general, who stood up and said that you can't shoot protesters with the National Guard.
yeah,
Uh,
totally.
uh,
Awful. So bad, man. I think that's the worst thing a president has ever said in the history of the country is when Trump on January 6th, he was like, uh, the security people told him like, we're not comfortable with you going out here to give the speech. at like the Ellipse where he like rallied the crowd. They're like, we're not comfortable with you going out here because the crowd has a lot of guns. We're not comfortable with it. It's unsafe. The Secret Service told him that, and he was like, I don't care. I'm going out there. They don't have their guns to shoot me.
Yeah.
And as holy fucking shit, man. Number one, he was absolutely right. They did not have their guns to shoot him. But like that shows like such a conscious awareness. Like fuck, man. Like that was. So I agree with you. I agree that I'm worried about it in that regard. But I also think the Democrats have overplayed that particular one in my view of like loyalists. It's like yeah, every president puts people around them who agree with them. So I don't know. I kind of see both sides of that one. But
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's no one that's there now though that's gonna stop him from doing what he wants, and he's got the
that's true.
mandate. We talk about mandate. He's Supreme Court has basically given him carte blanche to do whatever the fuck he feels like. So,
We'll see
there's
what
no one
happens
to.
with Doge. I mean, there's going to be some big, high-profile Supreme Court cases around Doge, like probably in the next few months, that I think will also be a huge test to see
Yeah,
what happens. But I would put my money on Trump winning those because he has six.
yeah. That's sort of the other scary thing is like, we have a Supreme Court that is profoundly conservative right now, and it's going to be
Yeah,
for a long
totally.
time. And I think our courts
Yep.
overall are going to get stacked with judges who really do see the one of the interesting things I find about this movement is the the there's like very deep uh uh what's that called? Sorry. Oh my God. I need to edit this. Um very deep. Oh man, we've been talking so long. I'm losing my focus.
Yeah, we
But
can. We're wrapping up
um,
here.
one
We
one
did
of the
90
things that
minutes,
I
which
find
is
very
good. Yeah.
intriguing about this is basically there's a criticism of like an aristocracy within government, that there's like too like that
Interesting.
there's
I agree.
that that there's too many folks in government, like sort of elitists who are pulling the
Yeah.
levers of power, and that if people knew that, they would not like that, and they want to solve
Yeah,
it
I mean, like Vivek
in,
calls it the fourth branch of government. I mean, Vivek calls it the fourth branch, and now Elon uses that phrase. So yeah, that's their view for sure.
but
Or
I
am
think
I? Are we referring to the same thing with that, or is that different?
just that there's like an aristocracy that exists, and it's like a hidden aristocracy, and their solution is to like build a government in the image of an actual
Hmm.
aristocracy. What am I saying? That aristocracy.
Aristocracy, yeah.
Yeah. So the criticism is that there's like a hidden aristocracy within government, uh, but their solution is just
Like who
they.
who would be an example of that? Like I'm not quite sure I understand that. Who would be an example of someone like that?
Well, mainly
Is it
talking
just
about
like
like
unnamed bureaucrats who like work for like the Treasury Department or something? Like who are we talking about with that?
just like elite liberal, like there's this notion in liberalism as well called expert control, and the belief of
Right.
like
Mm,
neoliberal stuff and Democratic Party is that you should put you should decentralize government, and instead of having one expert or like one executive, you should have executives within the government who all are experts at the thing, which
got it.
to me just makes a lot of sense. It's like no one's that
Yes.
fucking smart where they can just do it. But the criticism, and like Yarvin will talk about this, is that this is actually like an aristocracy, and like it like creates like the consultant class, and like these sort of
Mm,
these like it's just elitist or
yeah.
whatever, and like that's
Interesting.
what they use to drum up
Yeah.
frustration. But the solution is like just to have more control, like let like a larger, like it doesn't really feel like the solution here is like giving anything back to the people. It kind of just feels like they're
Mm,
like they're like like they're gonna buy like $400 million of cyber trucks, the government. Like why is that? That seems insane. Like who's going to really win from this, from like privatizing everything? Why Betty, like, why are the people who are in charge of education like also
Mhm.
investors in private, and like taking down the Department of Education, also investors in private schools? Like it's just like, like
I mean,
the
there's a
comp
lot of corruption. There's a lot of corruption for sure around. I mean, Trump is like one of those people who just like has an aura of corruption around him, like no matter what he does. It's kind of like the King Midas touches anything, turns to gold. Like Trump touches anything and it kind of just turns like chaotic and corrupt. But I think the interesting thing is like recognizing that, but also recognizing that there are certain issues, big ones, that he does get directionally correct in
yeah.
terms of like the loss of manufacturing, the the bureaucratic overpowering the people. I think that he gets that right. Um, you know,
Yeah.
there's a longer list. We've talked about a lot of them already, but like, so that's the paradox I think of this movement is that it's like it's run by a person who is inherently a corrupt, chaotic liar, but he gets a lot of the big, most important questions directionally correct.
And then the
And
paradox
so,
of the left
right?
is, and maybe that's like the polarity, is like on the left you have the group that like sort of posits on and value and virtue signals, and like is supposed to be the moral high ground, but is actually like kind of the, or is the establishment in the problem. So that's also
That's
the,
right. That's right.
you know
That's right.
it's
Exactly.
the, if the
Exactly.
Democratic Party like looks at what's happened and is like, oh, it's because the base didn't know what they wanted, or because we had a bunch of like liberals who like were mad about Gaza, and they like don't fix anything, like you,
Yeah,
you
they'll just
know
lose every time. They'll just keep losing. I
every
mean,
time.
they'll lose to JD Vance in 28 and 32 and then they'll lose to someone else in 2040. Like it's just yeah, they're going to just keep on losing if they don't fix this. I think they're in a pretty big crisis right now, which we've kind of touched on, but I don't know how they'll solve it. They need a better message for sure.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
it's
I guess
God because you need a credible opposition party, especially right now. Like you need a credible opposition. And me as like a centrist, I'm like, we need a credible opposition and we don't have one, you know?
yeah, yeah, and I think for me, I hope, hope somebody watches this, and going to the next deal. Like, I think what I really fear is capitulation on the information front, and like, people getting pulled into a 1984 thing where they just, they believe whatever Rogan says or whatever Musk says on X or podcasts, which end up being like 80 to 90% of impressions. And like, I'm actually kind of a believer that rationality does exist and reasoning does exist, but it's like, again, construct of using it a lot that becomes your heuristics. Um,
Mm.
and and like, I think because of, we're entering this like shitification of the internet in a post-truth world, like there's never been a better time to like, one, diversify, like get back into a lot of these things, are things that have happened many times over. Like
Yeah.
this is this is the Federalists versus, this Thomas versus Hamilton. This is a Civil War. This is stuff, like these things just keep coming
Mm.
up. So I think there's a
Yeah.
lot more to
It's like
learn
that
from.
history repeats it. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. I agree with that. I think now more than ever is a good time to like read the classics, read the futurists, read like science fiction, read things that were relevant 10,000 years, like read Marcus Aurelius, like read people who are like have stood the test of time or who are like trying to paint a future that is like genuinely different than not just like what is the marginal tax rate in 2026, like like those are not the most important questions. The most important questions are like how do we harness the technology that we're the incredible technology that we're building, how do we like heal from like our moral deficits as like a species, these bigger questions I think are more important to ask right now because it is a very high chaos, like I was saying, like high variance. There's a lot of things that could happen, and especially we haven't even really talked tons about AI directly, but like that's a massive amount of variance and uncertainty essentially. So you
Yeah,
take the Trump administration plus like Oh yeah, by the way, we still have nuclear war as a possibility, just like we did for the 20th century. And now we have AI, potentially like AGI, that's like going to either replace all the workers or like take over the world. That's chaos. And you have like the potential war with China. And so it's like those are massive uncertainties. And I think in a time of high uncertainty, we need people who are highly informed, highly stable, highly capable of like making good decisions and not just like being sheep. So I totally
Yeah,
agree with that last slide where you're just like, now is the time to go deep and not just like, listen to like Joe Rogan or Russell Brand or
yeah,
something.
we
I mean,
we
I kind of
really
like
need.
Russell Brand. He's fun, but he's not deep. Like he's not he's not like a good source of like quality information. You know what I mean? Like,
I think it's been, you know, like we talked about there being just like a lot of sort of gray area on in the political field. I think this is really a time for like some form of new leadership to emerge, um,
mm,
or like a new way of viewing the world. I forgot to mention, I wish I would have, but Balaji had mentioned that he thought uh, the Democrats going after um, crypto would be the thing that triggered the civil war. I really think what did it was platform control on OpenAI going for uh, more like regulatory capture and just the overall raw economic opportunity that exists in AI, just being so critical that like I think it kind of
mm,
made made people jump a little. But sorry to
mm.
just as we got there to your closing statements.
No, yeah, I agree. I agree that the AI cannot be removed from this whole equation. I think that people are a little bit on edge because of AI. Like literally nobody knows whether their own skill set will be washed away with the tide or actually come out stronger because of AI. Nobody knows that. And so everyone's a little bit anxious about the future. And I think that's part of what kind of like one of the many things that like set the stage for the ability to have like a pretty extreme like political realignment in 2024 was just the anxiety and kind of the overwhelming knowledge that a lot of people have around like, oh, like maybe my entire skill set that I've worked 20 years to build up is just going to be completely useless in a year. So like might as well take a chance, you know what I mean? Like I just feel like a lot of people were feeling like that and that's a huge factor in this whole discussion.
Like latent, yeah, subconscious anxieties too of like yeah,
Right.
I think on like the metaphysical level, people sort of anticipate we're in for something interesting, and like the call to
Yes.
nationalism and stuff, and like is sort of like a reaction, a defense mechanism to like some future state that people maybe can't articulate but can feel. Um,
Totally. Right. Well, when you have no way to like grasp onto anything solid in the future, I mean, even like very basic questions like will I be able to like I don't know like there's so many examples of like questions that people thought they knew the answer to for thousands of years and now AI is like oh wait maybe we were actually wrong about these very basic things about humanity and what it means to be human and under that circumstance the psychological reality is that I think people are more risk tolerant I would say um,
well, thanks for the long
yeah
chat.
man that was great that was super useful I found a lot of insight in that and that was really fun. Okay, man.
Yeah,
I'm gonna end
we're finally
end the
doing it
call, but
live.